Hi guys, it's Michelle Mira from michellemira.com. I want to talk about food addiction and a little about my story. Food addiction is in my family. You know, my mom and my sister, my grandmother, we all would comfort eat. And I know a lot of people can relate to this. You know, if we went, not just comfort eating, but all of our social events were centered around food. We would get together with friends and family, go out to eat, or we would cook a big meal for everybody for social gatherings. And so food was a happy place for me. And I would think about food all day long. I would wake up in the morning thinking about food, like what I was going to eat. I would all day long be thinking about when I was going to get to eat next. And then when I would eat, it was never enough. I would go back for 3-4 helpings. I got to the point to where when I got a large pizza, I would feel like I had to eat most of it. I would eat 5 or 6 pieces of pizza and breadsticks, and it was such I just could never get enough of the food that I was eating. And then as soon as I was done, even if I was full, I would be thinking about my next meal. What was I going to have? When could I have more? And so this was just normal for me. And like any addiction, it becomes obsessive. Your thoughts about it become obsessive. It becomes the number one thing in your world. And that was very true around food. And I could say no to a lot of things, but savory, cheese, cheese and chips, like that was my thing. And I could eat a whole bag of chips, and then I could go eat a box of cereal. And I was very active, and so I was able to keep my weight down for many, many years, even while having like such a love for food. And I just consider myself, I'm a foodie. I love food, and that's great, And then when I started noticing that it was something that I couldn't quit. I couldn't quit eating carbs. And if I did quit eating carbs and then I went back and I had one thing with sugar in it, or one thing that had carbs, one chip, it would just set me off on like what other addicts experience with just, wanting more and more and more, and just making that like my number one priority. And I got to, when I was in depression, I would get to where I just would eat alone, and I wouldn't want anyone to bug me, and I wouldn't want anyone to share my food. I mean, it became ridiculous. But the reason I'm sharing all of this is because through dry fasting and through transitioning to breatharianism and using prana for food instead of food, it has enabled me to not crave sugar. It's enabled me to not be obsessively thinking about food, and it's enabled me to actually break free from the food addiction. And this can happen with intermittent fasting, this can happen with dry fasting, but for me specifically, it has happened through prana, through using prana for food. And for me, I've always had to kind of substitute. So if I quit sugar, then I needed to substitute that with stevia or with agave syrup, something that would fill that flavor in. When I stopped eating salt, I used Bragg's liquid aminos, which tastes like soy sauce. And when I cut out flour, I would use coconut or a substitute spelt or almond flour. And so for me, substitution is absolutely essential. And that is what, when I cut out food entirely, I had to have something to substitute and fill that in, which was prana. Prana is life force. Prana is living air. And for me, it's also a presence, a divine presence that comes in and fills the places of emptiness. Because for me and for many addicts, actually, I think addiction at its core is a deep emptiness you're trying to fill. You're trying to fill it with anything and everything, but we all have our addiction. For some people it's pills, for some people it's food, for some people alcohol, and for me, that's the reason that I couldn't get enough. I couldn't eat enough food to fill the emptiness. And so just taking that food away wasn't giving me the healing that I needed. And when I started working with the prana, it was bringing life energy, it was bringing light, and it was bringing that divine presence of love into the emptiness, which was able to heal the wounds that cause that emptiness, the traumas that cause that lack, that empty hole, that is so scary. That emptiness is so scary. When you take away what you're filling it with, and you take away your distractions, and you're just stuck with that emptiness, that is a terrifying place to be in. And, for many alcoholics, for my dad, he stopped drinking, but he didn't continue to do the spiritual work or AA, and he was a dry drunk, and he would become agitated or sleep all day, or, there were symptoms of just like anger, just raging anger would just come out of some situation that shouldn't have enraged him so much, and so there was the dry drunk part, because when we just take away the food or take away the pills and we don't do the inner work to work on the wounds, to work on that emptiness, then it's still there. The addiction's still there, and it's still going to trigger you, and it's still going to be destructive in your life. And so this is what I've been noticing. And working with prana fills that. It fills that emptiness. It heals the wounds that are causing the addiction itself. And I had experiences previously in my life where when I started meditating a lot, or I was in a situation that had a lot of the divine energy built up, I wouldn't be hungry, and I would not be obsessively thinking about food. So it's kind of, it's something that other people do have experiences with, when you're full, when your spirit and your soul is full, a lot of times you won't crave your addiction. Like I have many friends that learned to meditate, and then they just didn't want to drink anymore, or they were done smoking, that sort of thing. So working with prana is a way to consciously start building that up, and to go to those places that are terrifying, and to be able to bring your life force into those places that have been pushed away, that have been neglected, that have been denied. And it doesn't have to be as painful as we think originally, Now, fasting, there's always an element of needing to be disciplined, but with the prana, there's an ease in there, and it actually can take away the hunger. It's funny, I joke and I'm like, okay, it's time to feed, which means go do my prana exercises, it's time to eat. And it really does feel like you're eating, it feels like on a bigger level, you're nourishing your whole being, and not just your belly. You're nourishing your emotions and your mind and your soul when you're feeding from prana. And you can use prana and start building this up without fasting. And as an example, you can do the same with sun gazing. When people start sun gazing, they're still eating regularly, but they're just going and gazing at the sun for a few seconds within a certain amount of time of day. You can't do it, in the middle of the day, because it's not good for your eyes, but there's a certain way to do it. And I got to the point where I wasn't hungry. I even was at my mom's and she was offering my favorite food and I just wasn't hungry. And to be around my family and to turn down food was just not something that had ever happened to me before. And so that's what happened with just a regular but short time of sun gazing practice. And prana is using the air, breathing in the air, whereas the sunlight is using the sunshine. But it's that life force energy. And so you can keep eating what you're eating and start doing pranic exercises, and you'll notice that it starts to fill you, and you'll notice that it starts to heal you, and that it's really a miraculous and beautiful and simple process. And then you can actually naturally just let your desires fall away from there. I chose to cut, to do the fasting and the prana, which actually just increases your vibration extremely fast. And you really get to this level of buzzing, and you'll start getting downloads from divine source. That's where you really can tap into like opening the third eye and really developing your vision and your psychic powers and increasing love. It just happens a lot faster. But for some people, you might not want to start right away with fasting. You might just want to kind of build up the pranic awareness and get familiar with and build a relationship with prana. So I wanted to talk about this today because food addiction is it's a big deal. A lot of people suffer from it, and it's an addiction that normally you can't just quit. And even if you do quit eating, food is it's such a social, there's so many associations with social interaction with food. When you stop drinking, you just don't go to bars and you don't hang out with people that drink. It's a little bit more difficult when everybody eats food, and family events and holidays and special occasions and celebrations are normally all focused and centered around food. And so it's a little bit harder to just go, okay, I'm quitting food altogether. So you really do have to find a way that is gentle with you and find a way that you can do it, because there's so many yo-yo dieters that are actually just really trying to get a hold on the addiction, and they're really trying. And so this has been what's helped me kick my food addiction and sugar addiction, and it's given me freedom. And so I want that for everybody that suffers from food addiction, because it's a hard one. I mean, all addiction is hard, but this one is definitely hard. So I hope this has been helpful. If you have questions, feel free to ask me. Share your own experiences and subscribe, because we'll definitely be carrying on this conversation.